Hello, hello. We have a very special episode of Topline today, mostly because Sam Jacobs isn't with us. That's actually why it's so special. But the other side of it is we are co-hosted not just by myself, AJ Bruno, CEO of QuotaPath, not just by Asad Zaman, CEO of Sales Talent Agency, but we also have Bob Moore, CEO of Crossbeam and Reveal Crossbeam. Just Crossbeam.
Just Crossbeam. All one big happy family now, yeah.
And of course, a return guest in Bob and a return guest in Peter Walker, Chief Insights Officer, that Henry Ward actually last week gave him that title.
This is a public platform. We can't be doing that.
Yeah, can't be doing that. Head of Insights at Carta. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. And Peter also started a podcast. If you haven't listened, check it out. It's in person, in studio, in Carta's office.
Yeah.
So
what's it called? The Data Minute as well?
Data Minutes. That's right. Got to keep the branding.
Love it. Love it.
Welcome to Topline, the podcast for the best founders, operators, and investors in B2B tech. Every week, AJ Bruno, Asad Zaman, and me, Sam Jacobs, will break down what's important for you to know to be the most well-informed professionals in the market.
This episode of Topline was brought to you by Aircall, the business communications intelligence platform. With Aircall, you can bring your CRM and help desk together with your phone, chat, and messaging system to save time and resources on customer communications, admin, and reporting. To deliver even better customer service, visit Aircall, that's AIRCALL.io.
Got a lot to talk about today. We're going to kick things off talking a little bit about the Crossbeam Reveal acquisition. Bob, you don't know this, but last week's episode of Topline, we made up all of the stuff on the acquisition. And we said, this is what's going to happen. Bob was too busy being on vacation that week to join us. So we were just going to make things up. And that's what we did. But yeah, Bob, we were kind of talking about it, and one of the things Asad brought up right before this episode was just, hey, AJ, you all have raised a lot of capital. Crossbeam's raised a lot of capital. You think about this world, think about the opportunities, think about M&A becomes very real, especially if you're you've built a more efficient business, and now you're like, okay, how do we invest the capital and the dollars?
Yeah.
But would love to hear firsthand from you. There's I told Asad this, there's the story that you tell in the press release and that story, and then there's the revisionist history, so to speak, and then there's okay, how this really happened. And so I'd love to hear from you on some of the nuts and bolts of this deal.
Yeah, I'm happy to just riff, and you guys feel free to double click on anything that sounds interesting. So yeah, if you're not familiar with these companies, so Crossbeam and Reveal have a lot in common. Both of our companies were founded around the same time. Both of us were founded by a founder who had recently exited another business to a much larger company and kind of observed a very specific problem in an enterprise environment and wanted to go solve it. Both the founders also have 2 kids under the age of 5, and a lot of kind of sensibilities that line up really well. But we had never met. And if you rewind the clock to 2018 or 2019, myself and Simon Boucher, the CEO of Reveal, both kind of set out on our own journeys to fix account mapping, which is this wonky term for how do we compare the data in our CRM system to the data in our partners' CRM systems without oversharing data or without doing anything that's going to undermine other core tenets of our business. So you want to answer really simple questions like, hey, partner, how many customers do we have in common and who are they? Or are my sales reps currently trying to sell to any of the same companies as your sales reps? The age-old way of doing that was terrible. It was emailing spreadsheets around, kind of like playing Battleship to try and determine where there might be an intersection in a sales pipeline or in a customer list. And it was just pretty fundamentally broken and insecure to add to the problems. So Simon and I each independently kind of came to this conclusion that the modern API economy, the modern data stack, kind of the digital transformation movement at large, and the migration of all this data into cloud-based CRMs created a window of opportunity to create a new software category. And that software category is what Crossbeam and Reveal were both created to be, which is kind of like an escrow service for data. So like a secure, independent, third-party platform sits in between companies who want to answer those questions and allows both sides to maintain ownership and control of their own data, but get the answers out the other end so they can collaborate on like just the middle of that Venn diagram.
Were you both calling the category the same thing at that time?
Category naming has been a total nightmare-scape, and frankly, in my opinion, still is. Fairly early on, like Gartner caught wind of this and decided to create a category name called Partner Ecosystem Platform. Just like lights a fire up under everybody, right? But they did, look, they were first mover advantage, right? And we embraced that for a little while. Our very first company offsite we did after the pandemic was called the PEP Rally for PEP, Partner Ecosystem Platform. I have some, cheesy swag left over from that in my closet behind me. But that just kind of like didn't stick. And then we got into this mode where we started referring to the work that people do on our platform as ecosystem-led growth. And they started referring to it as near-bound. And I'll put a pin in this tangent because it's huge, but we basically had a bit of like category warfare going on out in the market, which included like I released a book called Ecosystem-Led Growth. They released a book called Nearbound. There's a lot of this redundancy doesn't even begin to speak to it, and a lot of market confusion over like what this stuff actually is. But the bottom line is like if I get on a call with an enterprise prospect or somebody who has some buying power and feels this pain, the real thing that I actually need to say to them is the phrase account mapping. It's kind of, it invokes a little bit of an old school motion in people's heads, but it is the thing that we are.
Well, you're talking to something that's pretty interesting in the sense that you're both spending a ton of money competing against each other for this term.
Yeah.
In this category and like who's going to win. And so it's like, why would you spend so much money doing exactly that? And you're just going head to head and confusing the market potentially even further.
Yeah. So I'll continue a little bit of inside baseball here, right? Because you're so right on. And I think where and how the venture funding comes into this story becomes pretty critical. So we, as far back as call it 2020, the pandemic breaks out, interest rates go to zero. We get into this kind of like zero interest rate phenomenon era. And what you have here is, if you think about the company that I just described, right, that is kind of like this escrow service for data, there's a really important thing that shows up super early when you try to build it, which is this is a network effects business. And you have a massive, massive cold start problem when you have a network effects business. So like, imagine starting LinkedIn from scratch, right? It's like there is no such thing as single player mode. There's no value proposition when the people that you want to connect with are not on it. So there is this very capital intensive period of time at the beginning of starting these companies where you basically need to create these little atomic networks of connected companies that get value by doing work on your platform. And then when they are successful, it creates this nice viral loop that allows the thing to kind of grow on its own. And both of our companies experience that viral loop in the 2019, 2020, 2021 time period in this incredibly exponential way. I've done a little bit of like blogging about this because it's like if you geek out on network effects, it's absolutely wild. We maintained a K factor of greater than 1 for like multiple years, which in short, that's basically like for every company that signs up, more than one additional company is going to sign up on average just by virtue of them. The rate at which people invite subsequent other companies to join. If you have a K factor above 1, you are definitionally going to be growing your user base exponentially. And that is a fully product-led growth loop. Like these companies, we don't have any SDRs. We don't have any, we don't spend money on ads. We do this brand marketing, category creation stuff, but that's kind of it for marketing budget. And both the companies just saw our network of businesses using our platforms explode into the thousands and then into the tens of thousands over that time period. And venture firms took notice. And this was the perfect time to have a business that was growing like a weed exponentially, but have no revenue and get tons of venture valuation. So it was like, and we both experienced this. And I say this openly, and I think like our investors are smart. Like this is the smartest, best board I've ever had. And we have now a combined board that includes Insight partners along with Andreessen Horowitz.
Yeah, well, hold on. Let's wait. This is actually kind of funny.
Yeah.
Because Insight's on my board too. But Bob, what was your first job?
Oh man, so yeah, my first job out of college, I worked at Insight Partners for 2 years as an investment analyst, doing a lot of cold calling to CEOs, and then doing a lot of due diligence work later on to kind of analyze prospective investments. And
I love that they invested in your rival's business, your competitor business.
Allow me
Did
to say,
they?
I love Insight to death. Like that experience, I could have never done anything that I've done in my career from an entrepreneurial standpoint, if not for like the people at Insight that supported me, all of whom are still there, by the way. It's like such an awesome core OG group.
Rachel Geller.
I am still in the Insight Fantasy Football League and have been throughout this entire thing. But we were like ships in the night with Crossbeam. And I think we were always just like, the deals were a little pricey. They came together a little too fast. It just it didn't quite perfectly align with Insight's model always. And it just came to be that Insight was not an investor in any of our rounds, despite all the love there. But this space is like interesting. And like Reveal had a pretty interesting business going as well. And Insight ended up investing, writing the largest check into Reveal. So, in August of 2021, we raised $76 million from Andreessen Horowitz. In January of 2022, Insight puts $50 million into Reveal. So you have these two companies that are, I will say subscale is a conservative way of saying when you talk about the amount of revenue that they had. However, both companies had literally many, 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 many thousands of like very highly active companies connecting and engaging, like the data moats, right? And the data that are being built by these companies are meaningful. So yeah, you end up in the spot where you've got these two companies that are kind of, existing in parallel within a market that doesn't actually exist yet, because there is no actual like revenue basis for the market, right? This is not like, hey, we're like two competitive companies in this big established market that are like gonna, bump into each other all over the place. We are both figuring out how to go from 0 to 1 basically at the same time with effectively what feels like an unlimited pool of capital. And that is thankfully, Simon and I are both like multi-time entrepreneurs who did not squander that capital, right? Like we've both been, it's enough capital that we could spend a little bit like drunken sailors, but also like keep most of it in a safe place for a reason and never get into the scary zone.
That's actually the interesting part of this. We were looking at like valuation, size, etc. last week, and they raised, I think, give and take half the capital as you guys at half the valuation. Probably a company that's give and take even today half the size of you guys, and so. I was quite curious to understand the calculus because it might be the data part of this, because I was wondering why not just, they didn't set out to be merged, lose their name and have this outcome, right? It's not an ideal outcome for any entrepreneur. For you guys, it's a fantastic outcome. For them, it's not the most ideal outcome, but it's a nice outcome, right? It's better than nothing. And so why not just let them be and go and buy something that advances the product suite vertically and horizontally? Like there was a specific calculation that the better bet for us is to buy our competitor and consolidate the space versus go and buy something that advances what we're building horizontally or vertically. Talk to us a bit about that. Like what was that calculation based on?
Yeah, so a couple things. So one thing that's like a really important like prerequisite to this entire conversation is the fact that this deal that we just did is an entirely stock deal.
Yeah.
There was not a single person that got cashed out. There was no liquidity issued anywhere, right? So what that means is, and we very intentionally have thought about and talked about and kind of like designed the bringing together of these companies in this way. This really is a merger, like in the proper sense. And while the Crossbeam brand is the one that kind of survives on, Reveal is alive and well and thriving inside kind of the bones of that Crossbeam organization. And every person that was a shareholder in Reveal is now a shareholder in Crossbeam. And this was not a situation where they did not need to sell. This is a company that had a material amount of dollars on their balance sheet still. And the logic behind doing this was not about any kind of exercise in, taking advantage of a company that was in a weak position. These guys could have continued on for years and years, and so could have we. There was just one thing that got in the way, And that was, we care a lot about our customers. And if you look at the number one feature request that existed in the product logs that exist inside of Crossbeam, the number one by far, without a close second, integrate with Reveal and be cross-compatible with Reveal's network. And if you go over to Reveal and you talk to their product leadership and you look at the number one thing that got asked for by their customers about their product, please, for the love of God, integrate with Crossbeam and make these networks integrate with each other. Because imagine a world where like there were two LinkedIns and everybody that you worked with at your first job was on one of them and everybody that you worked with at your second job was on another one. It's not just that the value for the companies themselves gets fragmented. The value for the customers was intrinsically screwed up. And look, AJ has lived through this, right? Like HubSpot, huge partner of QuotaPath, is a Reveal customer and is on Reveal and has their partners being on Reveal. But we've got a very significant long tail of other like marketing and sales technology solutions that are Crossbeam loyalists that exist on Crossbeam. So what does QuotaPath have to do? They have to sign up for two platforms, go through somewhat identical and annoying onboarding processes. They have to integrate their CRM systems to both of these platforms. They have to do all these data mappings. They have to worry about kind of like all the security and rule setting and governance and things related to two. This is not like, hey, am I going to use Snowflake or Databricks and I'm going to pick one? Or hey, am I going to use Salesforce and I'm going to pick one? Everybody was using both, and it sucked for the customers. And I think
Bob, quick story on that though. Like, legit story. Rippling's a big partner of ours. We're working on the go-to-market enablement, Crossbeam, HubSpot, Reveal. We needed to figure out where we could be super connectors to both of those platforms, and then had to do like export and like create our own double-blind spreadsheet. So we basically rebuilt Crossbeam and Reveal. So we're actually doing it ourselves now.
Now we want to sell to you guys because it seems like you're acquiring.
Yeah, how do you feel about a merger?
Do you feel like that this actually creates a little bit of that in the market where somebody is like, okay, in this space, it doesn't work to have too many players. So start something, get to 1 million, get a couple of clients, Bob's going to buy us. Like, do you think there's going to be a bit of that going on?
I don't think it works like that in reality. Like if you read Andrew Chen's book, The Cold Start Problem, these things, I don't want to undersell what I talked about before, which is the activation energy required to bring something like this to life required both of us to raise these, like, this could have never happened in a world where the pandemic didn't.
Interesting.
Like this merger is a pandemic merger because pandemics send interest rates to zero. Two companies that have no business raising an aggregate of $150 million of capital raise it within a 6-month time period.
I love that you're saying this. Like, I love that you're this transparent about it. Like, it's beautiful. Like,
genuinely, like, I would have to be so incredibly intellectually dishonest to put it any other way.
I love it. I think that's like one of the coolest things anyone has said on the pod. So, tell us this. You started this company. You were lucky in the sense that you timed it perfectly. You were able to raise the capital required to get something like this off the ground. You had a competitor in France that decided to do the same thing. You guys are fighting it out. And while you guys didn't know each other, you guys were each other's number one competitors, right? So there's feelings, there's emotions, there's animosity that develops against competitors. Not like in a violent way, but like no one loves their competitors. And so how are you going about integrating these two organizations? It's always really tricky when you acquire a competitor because people have grown up not liking the other company, and now you need to make these people friends and collaborators and get along. How do you do that?
Not to mention French, by the way. So you got to add that twist to it.
Yeah, there's a geographic divide, there's a time zone divide, there's a cultural divide. I'll tell you a little story that I think helps inform this, and it's the same story that I told the company in our first joint all hands, which is at my first company, RJ Metrics, we had a competitor called Looker, and man, we hated those guys. Anytime Looker showed up in a sales process, we heard a prospect say the word Looker, like it just sent like a chill into our bones. You know, time would march on, and this rivalry would continue. We sold RJ Metrics in 2016 to Magento for a paltry sum in the 8 figures, compared to 3 years later when Looker sold to Google for $2.6 billion. Right, so. There's kind of this like they won, right? Like Looker won, and even that you think would like reinforce this kind of visceral thing. But this thing happened, which was shortly before Looker was acquired. my same co-founder and I, Jake Stein, we started another company called Stitch Data, which was even nerdier than RJ Metrics. It was like data infrastructure. It was like an early Fivetran. And we started going to market, and we realized that the number one other solution that people used alongside Stitch Data that was complementary was Looker. And we ended up forming a technology partnership with Looker. And there was a date where Jake and I flew out to Santa Cruz and met with like the Looker founding team. And we go into the office and like, you know, we kind of go and sit down and, you know, we're like, are we the fox in the hen house here? Like, you know, it's kind of like, I feel like I'm walking into Mordor, right? And I go and sit down there, and this group comes in, and Jake and I look at each other 5 minutes in, and we're like, damn it, we love these people. And it turns out that when you start a company at the same time, trying to solve the same problems for the same customers in the same market, and you have a journey that you're on that's an entrepreneurial journey that has all the ups and downs that come with building a company. The reality is that competition is an easy place to like put all your nervous, negative energy, but it's never your biggest problem. Like you're your own biggest problem, your own product market fit, like the dynamics and the relationships that you maintain and grow with your own customers, your own decisions on your own roadmaps. Like competitors are a really easy bad guy to point at, but it turns out that when you're competitive with someone and you kind of live the same parallel life for years and years and years, chances are when you meet them, once you eliminate the fact that you're competitors, you are kindred spirits. And you've like gone through this journey where it's like, oh my God, we can finally talk about X.
Hey, Bob, that's really interesting. Is that at like a certain level? So is that like the founder energy where like you and him can like get along, but the salespeople can never get over the fact that for the last 3 years they've been talking about how that product is crap compared to ours on both sides, right? Like, is it nuanced based on years of experience, function, seniority? Like, is there some nuance to this for other founders that might be in the same position as you, looking to acquire a competitor? Maybe AJ is looking to get Spiff off Salesforce's hands because it's struggling there. Like, is there a lesson here for him?
Look, it certainly starts at the founder level, right? And that was one of the things when I met Simon for the very first time. I had this same exact experience that I had when I met the Looker founders. And we talked for 10 minutes at this partnership leaders conference called Catalyst in Miami back in, I think it was summer of 2022. And look, as evidenced by my relationship with AJ, like I think most CEOs are like total self-absorbed assholes, right? And like, I do not have that.
Nailed it. You're just like, yep, that is true. From what I've seen.
I talked to Simon, right? And we're sitting there, and we had a conversation that was 10 minutes long where like, we didn't really talk business, right? And like, we've been extremely careful at this whole process to be like appropriately arm's length and not do any, jumping of the gun on the way we collaborate or we share data or information or anything like that, right? Like all of that's been very, very meticulously managed. But we were able to have a conversation about like, what I mentioned at the beginning is like, he built and sold a company before and he went through that experience around the same time I did. And he's got 2 young kids at home, and it's kind of balancing, like we're both on this trip where we had to fly away from our families with young children to go be at this, conference, and like I've got my silly foam rubber mascot walking around, and he just gave a talk on a word that he made up, and it's like, what is crazy world that we're in, right? And like there's a little bit of like, I think the thing we had in common was just like an acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation that we were in, and a willingness to like point out the things that are kind of
that's interesting,
funny, fun, interesting, hard, exciting about like the founder journey and like the human journey, without needing to like drag it down into some petty, contest on who won the last sales deal that we competed on.
Bob, you mentioned the key phrase there that I think is on my mind, because there's like an inception level piece to this, which is share data. Whose platform did you use to share customer data?
Here's what's crazy about this.
We bought this out.
We actually joked about that. There's a couple other like small companies in the universe. Like maybe we should use that third one. So here's the thing: it was extremely, extremely, extremely important that we not do certain things during even the due diligence process after the term sheet was signed. We did not talk about a single customer. We did not share any information on pricing or pricing strategy. There was a data clean room, right, where the lawyers were and where a very small subset of operational people were, where the due diligence on like customer contracts and kind of the core things to make sure neither one of us was lying about what our business had, that work got done. There was an air gap between that clean room and myself and Simon. We did not use the due diligence period to be like, let's compare everything, because you literally, for antitrust reasons and in France they call it anti-cartel, which sounds a lot cooler. But for those reasons, like, you just cannot do that stuff. And it was like we went by the book, by the law on that in a really big way. So funny enough, it wasn't until after the deal closed that we got to do Crossbeam on Crossbeam. And in the 24 hours between like when the deal closed and when we had our first like full group in-house all hands, it was like a feeding frenzy going on in terms of it's like, finally we are one company, we are merged, let's go get it. And by the time we had our first like big group gathering, we had this whole like analytics presentation together on like the networks and where they intersect and like what there are some companies that were paying us both that we weren't aware of. There are companies that we swore were paying Reveal that weren't paying either of us, and vice versa. Just like really, really interesting discovery.
What about like, so you've acquired a company and you've given up a bunch, it's a cashless merger, right? But you've acquired cash. Like, they didn't.
Absolutely. It was a big part of the deal. It was a part of what made the deal make sense. Yeah.
So you have a bunch of your cash, they have a bunch of their cash. So you still have a bit of a war chest.
We just grew the size of our war chest by the size of a significant venture funding round. Yeah.
So what's your calculus here? Like, at this point, do you play another aggressive move and say, in the next 12 to 18 months, I might go out and pick up another company that broadens our product suite? Or do I just hold it for 15 years of runway and play this out and grow this TAM and grow this category out? Like, how are you thinking about all this cash now?
Yes. Look, rule number one of building businesses: don't run out of money, right? So I think like the paramount thing is making sure that we have this company capitalized in a way that lines up with how we want to invest. And I think there is a way to potentially manage the capital that we have on our balance sheet now in such a way that we never need to raise financing again. And I think that is a real gift, particularly in this market. And it's one that like we need to be really smart about managing and pacing through, and we need to execute, right? We could still screw this up in countless ways. But we've positioned ourselves in such a way where like incremental fundraising is just probably not on the table, and doesn't need to be. Until the IPO day, or we're like, well into the 100 million plus ARR universe, and kind of we're just operating in a different order of magnitude.
Wow, how comforting is that? Like, how calming is that? I can just do this. Like, I have conviction. I know that this is going to be a great category, and I just have time now. Time is in my favor. Like, how does that feel compared to like in previous companies? You've spoken so openly and honestly about the founder journey. It's one of the cool things about you. That's not always a feeling you probably had before, right? So can you contrast those two things?
What's interesting about my and Simon's journeys since 2021 is that we've felt like that the whole time. So like the fact that we did this deal hasn't necessarily changed the fact that we have always been operating in an environment where we had 5+ years worth of runway sitting in the bank because of the way we structured venture rounds going all the way back to the ZERP era. So I've had that to answer your question, it's unnerving. Like as a founder, you get into this in order to basically, because you're a adrenaline addict. And the clock is actually a really important and necessary thing. And I would argue that like, while it is theoretically true that like we're not going to likely be in a situation where we miss payroll anytime soon, I do think, in a couple 100 million years, like the heat death of the sun will consume the earth, right? And like I'm going to be an old man with my kids going away to college or having their own families, and like I want to make sure that I made use of the time that I have on this planet in a way where like I didn't dilly-dally. And what it does is it removes, and this is a leadership thing, right? it removes your ability to use artificial external motivators as an excuse for why the team needs to be working hard and you need to be making forward progress, right? Like every CEO loves talking about the big board meeting that's coming up, or this big.
Well, Bob, you had yours. Yours was the close of your Series A or Series B like the birth of your first child.
I used that. I had a baby in 2019 when we closed our seed round. No, it was our Series A round with First Mark. And I had a baby in 2021 when we closed our Series C with Andreessen Horowitz. And in both of them, like 3 months before, there was some like preemptive activity. And I said to them, I was like,
you need to have a baby.
I was like, I know. It is. It's something that's like a ticking clock, right? But like, yeah, this is very, it's very apt, right? Like, there is always, it's nice to kind of have like a boogeyman out there. Not to call my babies a boogeyman, but like it's nice to have some kind of like, it's almost like a Deus Ex Machina thing, right? It's like it's this ghost in the machine that is driving you. You have to develop it yourself, and this is the thing where like I think it's a crutch to blame the board for why it matters that you hit your numbers, or to blame the big conference that's coming up for the reason why it matters that you ship that feature on time. Like, and look, the crutches are there for a reason. If you got a broken leg, like put some crutches on, man. Like crutches aren't necessarily bad things, but I think what this forces us to do, and what both of these companies have been forced to do over the last 2 or 3 years, is to invoke urgency for the right reasons. And really, really drive at like the existence of intrinsic motivation. And that impacts like who you hire, who you put on your team, who you keep on your team, and how you think about talking about what success looks like internally. And I think that's like I won't call it a solved problem, and I won't claim that we're good at it. I just want to acknowledge that like that's the dynamic that's out there. Because us running out of money isn't like some, that's not kind of the false narrative that I can use to motivate people in this situation.
Speaking of clock, we went overtime. Bob, apologize on it for your calendar.
I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. When I heard that Sam wasn't going to be here, I cleared my.
Austin and I promised that we were going to make the best episode possible today, and I'm fairly confident we made that happen. So thanks so much for
that was great, Bob,
for joining us and having you on to talk through the acquisition. And really unique case, because this is also, just as a side, this isn't your first acquisition or merger that you've done at Crossbeam. You partnered.io back in 2020, 2021. You've also acquired. So just consolidating. So you're going to be on a few more, I'm sure, before its time is up for your IPO.
You never know what the future may bring. Yeah. Trying to do it right. Yeah.
Thanks,
guys.
Well, thanks, Bob. Are you ready to revolutionize the way your team goes to market? Join us from October 14th to 16th in Austin, Texas for GTM 2024, the premier B2B SaaS conference where the world's top go-to-market executives learn, plan, and execute strategies that fuel growth. Expect 3 days packed with interactive sessions and panels addressing top-of-mind challenges, hands-on planning and forecasting workshops for 2025, and of course, plenty of networking opportunities. Whether you come alone or bring your entire leadership team, you'll find valuable insights and dedicated time to prepare for the year ahead. And be sure to stick around Austin for GTM 2024 awards, celebrating the top leaders in our industry. Ready to get aligned and get ahead? Visit joinpavilion.com/GTM 2024 and use the code Topline for 15% off your ticket. Details are in the show notes. Hope to see you in Austin. See ya.
Okay. That was so interesting. Bob spoke very openly about this, about a couple of topics. That was fascinating. Peter.
Well, Peter was in the background checking the cap tables to make sure he was saying the right thing.
I couldn't catch him in any lies. So it's
as you were listening to this, as you were listening to this, Peter, tell us a little bit about, your key takeaways from it, or like what you were thinking as you were listening, because there was few things Bob spoke about that I really admire, because a lot of founders don't talk about these things. Yeah. They don't talk about how the creation of my business was this unique moment in time. If ZIRP wasn't there, this business wouldn't really be viable for investors, and we were able to capitalize. There's certain things he mentioned. So give us your thoughts. Let's talk that.
I found it fascinating maybe 3 points that I really loved from him. The first was the one you just acknowledged, that the ZIRP funding was actually instrumental in the creation of this business. And also now we've come to a moment where you have to make difficult decisions, if you're the CEOs of Reveal, for instance, about where that business goes. So that was one. I think that was a lot of companies that have told themselves, okay, we were perhaps overfunded at ZIRP, but we're going to use that money well. It's very interesting to see someone who's actually doing it. The second thing, and I think this was fascinating, was he spoke about the reason for the merger being effectively down to the network effects dynamics within the industry. Like, the network effects of that business are the fundamental reason why it made sense to get or be acquired. And that is very different from, I think, the vast majority of acquisitions that we're seeing. It's not often you run across a business that is so network focused like this. And I thought that was fascinating. And then the other point about how, you can use internal, external motivations to motivate people prior to and then up through an acquisition. I mean, I think he's clearly a very open and candid guy. That I don't think you would have necessarily heard that from a lot of CEOs.
Yeah,
it's us Philly founders. We're just here to tell the truth, because none of you else out in the valley, you just lie.
You're unable to get on Twitter due to the internet speed, so you come across different things. That makes sense. I get it.
I think the part of it that I thought was really interesting is we talk a lot about these companies that raised a lot of money during the ZIRP years, especially the peak ZIRP years, right? 2020, 2021, early 2022, first half of 2022. And a lot of these companies accelerated to 50 to 100 million in revenue. There are a lot of companies that also benefited from ZIRP and the demand and growth side of things. And now everybody just speeds down to them like they can't go public because their growth isn't good enough. They can't do this, they can't do that. It's like, yeah, and they can also just relax and keep building. Yep. You see such calm energy from him where he's like, I don't need to go back, raise any money. I'm just going to keep doing this till IPO. Yep. I'm good. Yep. And I think we look down on companies that might actually be just fine, doing their thing, chugging along, and they'll have great outcomes, because eventually, if you get to 100 or 200 million in revenue and you have a decent enough, unit economics, you will have a great outcome. You don't have to get there that quickly. You just have to get there.
I think it's very well said, and it probably has to. There's always this either hype cycle or doom and gloom. I feel like in startups where either things are going incredibly well or they've never been worse. And and for the founders like Bob, who were prudent about not spending that cash entirely in the boom times. I think that the part that is maybe missing is there were just a lot of companies who spent most of that money. And then you're in a much more difficult place.
Oh yeah, those ones are done and over with. I think that's where I found it interesting. I came into the conversation thinking that this was a soft landing for Reveal, and it still might be, right? Reveal obviously did that calculation and said we're better off being acquired than growing on it on our own for whatever reasons. Maybe they could have gone at it for a while, but they just felt that this was the right thing for them to do. There are a lot of these other cashless mergers that have been happening where I do think it's that they burnt the capital. They don't really have any other option, because nobody wants to be acquired and lose their name. It's very rare. And so this was actually a very nuanced case where there's a lot of network effects in their business. But I think for standard B2B SaaS businesses, it is something different. What's your data saying, Peter? You tell us a bit about the M&A side of things from your lens.
Yeah, so generally speaking, M&A, I think there was a theory that late 2023, 2024, there was going to be a rush of mergers because of the dynamics that you just outlined with ZIRP cash coming to an end, businesses that perhaps don't have a pathway towards the future looking to be sold. And I think the weird thing is that theory came true in everything except the actual acquisitions. Like, we are hearing a lot more startup founders who are much more open to the idea of being acquired than they ever would have been a couple years ago, but the actual completed mergers are just not there. So on Carta, it's something like 150 companies get acquired every quarter. That's been effectively flat since the start of 2023.
I have an idea around this. I have a really, here's my take on this. I think there's a hesitancy of founder CEO. Like, I'll take my position. We've raised a lot of capital. We haven't spent, we've have a lot of our balance sheets still there, and I've been approached by many founders on acquiring. And I've actually had open conversations with some of them. But deal cycles and sales cycles when you're selling products has slowed down. Hiring execs has slowed down. And mergers and acquisitions has slowed down. And the reason for that is just the hesitancy. We don't want to get married to an organization culturally that's not aligned, to an organization that's done some things wrong over the years. Like, we're just being much more careful, thoughtful, and considerate when doing this. And Bob made a lot of good points. One of the things that you just said, Peter, that I really agree with 100% is this idea of both companies being network effects that you don't see. And in some cases, when you zoom out, I don't think there was any other path for both of these companies. They're both network effect companies. If they're seeing scale, then the only way it's going to work is if they work together. That, like, literally over and over again. So I'm sure, and I actually know this because Bob and I have talked about this over the years, that this was a long time in the making for this to happen. And because I know people at Crossbeam personally as friends, it's actually not what you said at Asad in terms of like, oh, we hate Reveal because they keep taking customers. There actually was a lot more a relationship in a positive way for each company and admiration. Yeah, it used to be like 2-3 years ago, it was like, oh, we lost to them. But then it became much more of like we screwed up HubSpot. Bob called this out. We're Reveal customers, now Crossbeam customers, because of HubSpot. But I know people at Crossbeam have said, oh, we screwed up that deal with HubSpot versus like Reveal beat us.
So Catalyst and Tatango was not like that. Catalyst and Tatango did not like each other. That was animosity, it seems like, between two competitors. And so Kevin had spoken so well about how they went through that process to build a relationship between the two CEOs over there. And now they're going to be co-CEOs together. But they really had to build that relationship. There wasn't that type of interesting. This is just nuance. Like, this is very unique to the Reveal Crossbeam situation, it seems.
AJ, do you have don't reveal any private conversations, obviously, but you being approached by more founders in the interest of perhaps sparking a deal, how do you feel about those conversations? Like, what do those conversations mean to you? How do you decide which ones to actually engage in? Like, I'd love to have more about your thought process.
Yeah, well, so it's a great question, and I'll be transparent with some of these. I mean, from a roadmap standpoint, part of it is just like, what are we building towards, and what are we thinking about in roadmap? And there's a bunch of companies that are adjacent to our own organization that we're keeping tabs on. And I think about this from a future standpoint. I mean, I'm an personal investor in about 30 startups. I would say about a third, maybe a quarter of those are in like go-to-market. And just to really keep a pulse on what's going on in the market and advise. And I'm very upfront with the founders of like, hey, like, I want to have a side letter carve out, because if we ever get into a competitive situation, I just want to be super clear about that. But I'm not taking your IP. I'm just more curious about the world. And like, similar to why I do Topline, I'm just very interested in how founders and how people think about the different markets and market dynamics. Similar situation. So one part of it is keeping an eye and having those open conversations with those companies. The second piece of it is maybe a competitor approaches us and having that conversation and just really understanding. There, it's more about like, what are the things that they're offering, tech stack? Is this a competitor takeout, or is this like actually pulling them into the fold for something that we're missing? And we've had a handful of those conversations as well as of late. I have taken every conversation that someone has approached me, because I think I'm also just trying to help founders out. And I do not, competitive or not, I always have the founder's mind at heart. Now,
Even
the
with
fact of the matter,
competitors, screw them, no?
no, there's one competitor that I would say
sometimes.
through them, but yeah, sometimes. But I think Bob made the excellent point that I just was nodding my head at, which is we have shared overlap. We're both solving this really challenging problem around compensation. Worry about customers, not competitors. Dharmesh, co-founder of HubSpot.
I think that is wrong. I so disagree with
totally
that. No, that
disagree.
is completely wrong. I think people listen. You've got to understand that this ecosystem is growing at 31% a year in terms of the supply of tech companies. They're not these greenfield open categories anymore. These are competitive categories with fewer and fewer differentiators between these organizations. I think you do need to keep an eye on competitors when you have such competition within a category. So if you are lucky to have found that little bit of white space in the world, okay, go run at it, sure. But for most other companies, I think it is negligent to not be aware of your competitor's product roadmap, to not be getting insights and intels into how the organization is doing. Where is it vulnerable? Where is it not? How to attack and find some space. I keep a very close eye and think about my competitors a lot. How am I going to beat them if I'm not thinking about them?
Sure, but at the end of the day, you cannot get distracted by that. And I think that's the point of it is we as CEOs, we as founders, we as operators need to have a lot of things in our head and thinking about a lot of things at one time, and competitive markets is 100% one of those. But if you're saying, hey, you have an hour to spend time, an hour customer, or an hour to be inside a competitor's platform, I'm taking the customer.
Yeah, but it's not that absolute, right? Like you have many hours in the day, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Like I think it's one of the things that is important for an organization to keep an eye on. It might not even be your responsibility. Maybe Graham goes and does it, but somebody in the organization has to be doing a SWOT analysis.
Asad, you're speaking to the very fundamental issue with startups right now. In my opinion, there's so much noise in the market that founders are getting so crazed by what's out there. You have to focus on fewer things. You have to pick your priorities. And I honestly think this is one of the major challenges of no one's building massive companies from 2020 right now, not just because of ZERP and buying habits and cycles, but also because founders are just truly, there's a lot less great founders out there working on great things. And that's the reality of the world. And a lot of it is caused because we're all freaking out about what's out there. But you have look at Bob's demeanor, totally different demeanor. I think I've felt like I've had that demeanor this year. To Bob's point, or actually one of you just made the point of you have 2023, 2024. We're on the other side of the spectrum, and great founders work on the extremes. I know this about myself. I know every other founder, CEO that can be jerks, sure, but we work on extremes. And the reason for that is we are relentless and tireless at what we do in our craft. And our craft, if we do it right, is focusing on customer value.
AJ, do you think that affects, so to your point, a lot of founders are taking on perhaps being scattered in the amount of things that they're trying to do. Does that, to get maybe perhaps a little cynical here, like the standard adage, startups are bought, not sold. When someone comes to you with the idea of a merger, do you automatically discount that merger is going to be very useful because they're the one coming to you? Does that make sense?
I discount the very big reality that it's most likely not going to happen. Like there's the low likelihood. So, I'll give you a real example. There was a company that we were looking at, and I brought in my co-founders, and we kind of went through our own personal diligence, I wrote a memo to my co-founders and said, here's all the things. And we're like, do we want to take this to the board? Not with a recommendation, but just even bringing it up. And we said, no, not the right time. But we're working backwards from it because we know it's a good framework for us to do it, because I can't say with 100% confidence this is true and conviction. And I know my board listens to this, so I'll be careful about this. But I expect us to do a few M&A deals in the next year, 12 months. And so I'm going to flex that muscle and better understand what it is that's making some of these companies tick.
So you're having more and more conversations because you're like, okay, if I'm because you said a few, that's really interesting. Let's click into this a bit, right? you've got a war chest as well. Fantastic. It gives you optionality, perfect time to buy things, right? Like, as we've seen, there are companies that are looking to get sold, other organizations that might not be in such a vulnerable position as the ones that are cold emailing you saying, I'm trying to sell this thing. But they started the business when business was easier, and they're just like, oh God, this is what running and building and scaling a business is. I'm fine. Like, let's get out of this. I'll go be AJ's COO. And so how are you thinking about A, how many of them, B, the ones you are more interested in? Is it to consolidate your industry, or is it to advance your product suite? Like, how are you thinking about acquisitions?
I mean,
size, maybe. What type of size are you interested in?
There's three types of acquisitions that are here. There's the opportunistic, really just like the price is like just you have to do it kind of thing. We haven't come across that for us anyway, for our business. There's the roadmap, competitive but better together story that I think Bob had with his story. Like, and then there's a third piece of it, which is just they're adding a net new to a roadmap item that's like 2 or 3 years down the line that was a multi-product and will help your NRR story, because the world's consolidation is crazy right now and you need to make sure your NRR is above 100%. Those are the three stories. I'm in the latter two of what I've looked at and what I've seen. But it's always around timing of is this the right thing to do? And I have had a lot of these conversations, but it's not to the point where it's distracting for anyone but me. So it's not like I'm bringing it to my team.
It'd almost be negligent not to be doing this, right? Like, as a CEO with a war chest in this market, in this at a tech company, for you not to look at them would be wild.
Yeah, let's really quickly go back to something Peter said that I really wanted to ask him about, which is you're not seeing the amount of volume on deals that you thought you were going to see. And I just really want to double click into that. And you're seeing the data, of course, Peter's, but like, is what I conveyed on why I think that that's the case. Is that feel like that's the reason, or you just don't know?
I'm not exactly sure, but when we've tried to, gather the anecdata around the numbers, I think fundamentally it's the question of, so if we're looking at who buys startups, traditionally it's 2 or 3 or 4 major paths. There's other startups, the case that AJ's described here. There's private equity, there's big tech, and then there's just like, sort of consolidations, take private. There's like weird sort of other category. The
M&A that I was describing was real for personal for us versus the roll up.
If we look at the deals, if you can assume that if you're being acquired at pre-seed or seed, that's primarily an acqui-hire, especially the pre-seed stuff. That's almost all acqui-hires. So not a ton of value probably being created from those, except for the couple team members. Seed, Series A, Series B. Then you get into the late stage stuff, and the late stage stuff has been much harder. Then there's just fewer deals that are being done. What I think people were anticipating was that PE was going to be more acquisitive than they have been this year. So big tech, there's still a couple acquisitions happening. Startup to startup, maybe that's going to ramp up over the next year. But the PE buyer, where you're doing strategic roll-ups, I think that part of the market has been quieter than most people expected this year. And the question is why? And the answer is, well, perhaps the companies that are willing to be bought are not the ones that PEs want to buy. There's like a fundamental mismatch between the willingness to sell and the companies that are actually garnering a lot of interest. So it's, this paired with the lack of IPOs, this is having deep impacts in venture. You can't really see it because it's not in any of the charts yet. But like, where is the liquidity going to come from is a problem across venture capital.
There was also the plural side, I think, shutdown that happened at Vista a little while ago, right? And
shut down. They wrote it to zero.
Yeah, they wrote it to zero. That was huge. That was like a couple of $1 billion. I also think, Peter, as you were talking, it got me thinking that, a lot of our expectations are based on history. It rhymes, right? So what played out before, version of it plays out now. But I think the tech industry has evolved a lot. There was categories were less busy. you would have one, two major players in a category, bunch of zombies. Partly because there was such high switching costs back in the day that people, once a couple of companies had clear momentum, others were not really excited to jump into those categories. And now these categories are much busier. And I do think in conversations with founders that when they are getting a lot of this outreach, it is from competitors, and they're like, well, I'll just let this company die. Like, why do I need to buy it? Like, I can just hire your people and your customers are going to churn to me, and it's less exciting. It's less interesting.
If I'm a VC right now, I am, and I'm working, maybe I'm investing at the Series A. I am very, I don't know if interested or wary is the right word, but if there's going to be a real barbell here where founders take very little or no VC capital and build in competitive categories, but build as a quote unquote lifestyle revenue funded business and don't need the exit, versus building a venture capital backed business in some of these categories that are incredibly crowded, I think there's a meaningful shift in the level of acquisition or the level of liquidity that you can get over this typical venture fund timescale. And it's not an easy problem to solve. Maybe secondarily does, but even that's also kind of completely up in the air.
I've made the point, Peter, multiple times. I was also going to test this. I'm not starting a software business today. In today's world, I'm not starting a SaaS
There's
business.
no need to butter up to Sam when he's not here, AJ. He's not here. He's not going to listen.
Sam better be listening and taking notes on this. This is the best episode we've ever had, Peter. He needs to take furious notes.
Okay, so I have another question. You guys published some data around valuations, and you made the statement today that valuations are creeping back up to 2022 levels, which is fascinating. How much of that is being pulled by AI? Like even Clay, by the way, Clay is a weird deal. 7 years, they're about 10 million in revenue, 50x type of multiple, ridiculous in my mind. The AI multiples are wild these days, and I imagine that the aggregate valuation is being pulled by AI. Yeah. Am I right, or is it across the board coming back up?
I'd say yes and no. So one, are AI valuations higher than others? Yes, definitely. Is there as much of a gap now as there was in 2023? No, there isn't, especially for the non-infra AI. So the AI, and what we're hearing, again, this is mostly, some of this is database, but a lot of it's just conversation with VCs, is that they're running out of pitches that don't include AI in some way, shape, or form. So the SaaS median is getting closer to the AI median just because there are very few SaaS companies that don't incorporate it.
So the median didn't come down. The median has gone up now for essentially all these other companies that are slapping on AI on top of it. That's fine.
Which is fundamentally related to the number of rounds being completed. So the valuations can trend up or down as they will, but if you pair that with the funding activity, it's yes, seed stage valuations are close to all-time highs, but about half as many companies are raising priced seed rounds as did in the boom time. So, of course, you would just assume that the underlying quality of those companies is higher than it was then, which I think is a very reasonable assumption, then it kind of makes sense that the valuations are high. The valuations at the late stages are nowhere near where they were in the boom times. There's still a lot of room to grow. They're no longer at the bottom. They've started to climb back up towards health. So there's a lot of weird dynamics. We're going to produce some data fairly soon, I hope, on AI. And I think people will be a little surprised at AI is a market driver, yes, towards outperformance on valuation or fundraising, but not all AI, vertical AI applications and stuff. Those are being treated more like the AI is part of your tech stack, not AI is a meaningful differentiator in where your business is going,
That's really fascinating. On the late stage side, I think what was quite interesting was at the end of last year, you guys have published some data that showed that late stage valuations had picked up. And I think it was at the time where Q4, there was just exuberance in the market. Fed said rates will go down, and there were good earnings reports, and everybody felt excited about 2024. That seems to have tapered off. And so maybe that's why that stage is still a bit wonky. Yeah. This has been fascinating. I thank you for joining us. We're now going to do, what are we going to do, AJ?
The wows and shout outs of the week. We have this every week. We do this. We love it. It's our favorite segment. Sure. Asad, feel like you have one tip of your tongue to kick us off. What's your shout out?
I always freestyle these.
I'll go first if I got mine.
So I spent some time. We had a long weekend because we had Canada Day. Thanks for wishing me, AJ. So on Canada Day, I was sitting around and I was playing with ChatGPT. And I decided to use it to help me do two things: fix my skin problem and figure out a fitness routine. And I've gone to many dermatologists and skin specialists and obviously lots of trainers I've engaged. And I know what great looks like. So I was like, okay, let's see what this is. On the skin side, I've never had support of this sort. The way that it explains what's going on with your skin, you just take a picture of it and you show it and you give it some background, and it's like, okay, here are your issues, here's a protocol, this is what each of these things means. It explained things to me in a way that none of the professionals did. I went and I bought everything it said, and it wasn't like a crazy list of things. It was very like well thought out. I bought it, and literally in 3-4 days I can feel a difference. And I get lots of acne for some reason at this ripe age of 36, 37. So that's gone away. And on the fitness side, again, just it was so much better than the trainers I've ever worked with. And I've worked with some great trainers. And so I'm just impressed at how much value you can get out of it in these type of things. And I would recommend people go and try to use it for this type of stuff.
Was that a shout out to Sam Altman? Like,
excellent.
Shout out.
I will give it. Peter, who's your shout out to?
I recently met this plucky startup CEO. His name's Sam Jacobs. I think he's got a real bright future ahead of him. Oh man! Actually, my actual shout out, Asad.
Oh, I love that. I love it. But I love that he's really listening, and you're like, oh, I'm getting a shout out, and then you gotta
come out with the knees there.
Good job.
I am, for the first, I had never visited Canada, but this will be my third time in the last year because I'm going up to Montreal for Startup Fest. So I am super pumped, and shout out to the hospitality of all Montreal Canadians because I will be visiting.
Montreal's wild. Like, it's like you're in Europe. It's if it wasn't as cold as it gets in the winter, I would live there. It is such a great
Everyone says the same thing, is that in the summer
you don't love it. Paris. The people are beautiful. The food's great. The city is pretty. Like, it is just a beautiful city.
See, Asad, Peter wished you a happy Canada Day, apparently.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for your gift.
Also, isn't it like Canada Day? Just you had to have a holiday the same day, in the same week as America on our 4th of July tomorrow.
We just did it before you guys. We're like first.
What percent of this audience is Canadian? I appreciate that. Do you think?
It's a good, like 30, 40%, 30%, 35%.
No, 30 or 40 people. That's what he meant to say.
30 or 40% of the nation of Canada. I get
it. Yeah.
You know what I'm surprised by is that they're not more. I thought there'd be more Pakistani listeners. I don't have any Pakistani supporters, it seems. Like, we have
you have Asher Matthew. You have Asher. Asher's your Pakistani.
But he counts as US because he lives there.
Yeah. My shout out goes to my sales team for the third quarter in a row, hit 100% quota attainment, which is, as we all know in go-to-market, very unheard of. And 90% of the team individuals hit quota this last
Simba
quarter.
Hit quota. Go
yes,
Simba!
Simba hit quota for sure. But yeah, it was a great. It's going to be a post by Ryan Milligan, who led our sales team the past 3 quarters, and it's just been awesome to see that team. And they're fantastic. They're really, really good.
Is this time to increase quotas now?
Increase quotas, but I will also say that the most adaptive sales commission software on the planet, QuotaPath, was a part of this and helped fix our alignment.
Okay. On that note,
that's too easy. You know, like, there's no need for all of that.
That's too easy. Layup. Austin gave me a layup there. This has been a fantastic episode with your co-hosts, AJ Bruno, CEO of QuotaPath, Asad Zaman, CEO of Sales Talent Agency, Peter Walker, Head of Insights at Carta. We were joined by Bob Moore, CEO of Crossbeam earlier. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
This episode was brought to you by AirCall, the business communications intelligence platform. Deliver a better experience for your customers and your teams at AirCall. That's AIRCALL.io. Save time, save money, and improve performance with a single communications platform.
Thanks for listening to Topline. New episodes come out every Sunday. If you like what you heard today, subscribe so you never miss an episode, leave a 5-star review, and share it with your friends. Don't forget to join our Topline Slack channel to connect with us and discuss the topics we cover with other listeners. Click the link in the show notes. Lastly, if you're interested in joining Pavilion, you can learn more about membership at joinpavilion.com/membership. Thanks again for listening.